Gifted, genius, exceptional. Words that shimmer with promise and intrigue. Yet for those donned with these labels, the reality can often be a labyrinth of challenges. What happens when towering talent meets the tight confines of a normalized world? In this episode, Harri James O'Kelley of the O'Kelley Lab unveils the complex tapestry of living and supporting the twice exceptional. Join us as we venture beyond the labels into a realm of understanding and empowerment. Hi, I'm Dr. Teresa Haskins, and welcome to Think Differently, the podcast that challenges the status quo and explores the power of neurodiversity to create a more inclusive and accessible world. Together, we will talk about everything from the value of different perspectives to the limitless potential of human beings. We'll explore how embracing differences can lead to endless possibilities and how you can maximize strengths to make a positive impact on the world. So sit back, relax, and join me as we get ready to think differently. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Thinking Differently. Today, we have a truly inspiring conversation lined up for you that's very close to my heart, empowering twice exceptional individuals and igniting opportunities so they can thrive. Our guest today is Harri James O'Kelley, a filmmaker, a storyteller, and founder of the O'Kelley Lab. Her work in the field of education advocacy, particularly for twice exceptional individuals, has been nothing short of transformative. She's a true champion of the cause to ignite opportunities, and I welcome you, Harri. It's really an honor to have you here today.
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. Wow, I am just so humbled, and you had me at hello.
And you're really recognized. There's a lot of interest in your work. So I'd really like to start with you sharing a bit more about the O'Kelley Lab and the mission behind it. How did you come up with the idea? Like, what's driving this passion in this space for you?
First of all, thank you so much for acknowledging us by having us on your show. And I love the differently thinking that whole idea, because of course, as twice exceptional kiddos or individuals or adults, we're usually those outliers that think differently. And people are calling us out for that. I've had people just say to me a lot of times in my life, "You're so off topic." And I'm really not off topic. I'm just coming at that topic from such a different point of view that it makes you feel like this loner. So I'm so glad that you're embracing this and you're letting us talk about it today. So the O'Kelley Lab is a grassroots effort by our family. And it started with just some ideas that my son, Jordan O'Kelley, when he was in when he was in kindergarten at age 5, he went to kindergarten and he had an idea that the behavior chart that was in the class was wrong. And so even though he was identified as autistic at that point, and they would not look at him for gifted, I kept seeing things as a mom. And I know all moms think their kids are amazing, but I kept seeing this thing in him that was problem solving. He was just a big picture person in this little bitty body. And he was pretty quiet, but he would see things and want to change them. And because I was looking at him through that lens of the autistic individual instead of a twice exceptional individual at that point, I felt like the schools and people in the community were missing who he was as a whole person. And so the O'Kelley Lab started as ideas by Jordan. Then it went into education heroes, because when I was in school and volunteering, I would be finding ways to empower individuals in the kids' classes or the teachers that wanted to do projects that no one would give them funds for. So I was constantly creating these opportunities and cheerleading. I was really cheerleading and problem solving. And so it later then evolved into the O'Kelley Lab, somewhere around 2014 into like 2016 is when it really kind of like went full-fledged. But it's literally anything that any parent can do. If you see that your child is not being acknowledged or not being valued, falling between the cracks, it's just like you see that thing in them and you want to have them keep progressing in that positive way where they feel like they're succeeding. And so that's kind of what the O'Kelley Lab started as. And then we were kind of this lab. And so I was going to all these education, conferences and summits and reading all these different books. And I had this one, he was a therapist that had done this, this amazing presentation. And afterwards I was talking to him and I was telling him some of the things that we were doing and how I would get a couple of kids together that were like-minded. And I would start trying to do these little kind of projects or almost like research studies with them, not in a bad way, but like, hey, where are we going with this? This is so exciting. It was always like exciting and following the kids' lead. And this therapist said to me, you know what, you kind of have a lab. You're kind of doing a lab. And I was like, well, no, I don't have any money. I'm just a family. We're just at our kitchen table. We're just coming up with these ideas. And he goes, no, you're creating these pilots and you're kind of doing research. And that's where the O'Kelley Lab kind of formulated into, we're going to call ourselves the O'Kelley Lab.
And then some of that, though, has transitioned into film. So I know that you have done films, but Jordan has done films. When did you segue into that as an advocacy platform? How did that get going?
I think that starts with, let's look at our strengths. And my background is in filmmaking. And so I was an actor and I went to film school. And so that's, I brought that to that creative piece to being a mom and a problem solver and being resourceful. So I think every parent has whatever they have, to bring to the party. And you get to those PTA meetings and it's like, what committee are you going to be on? And I think that I just realized pretty early that if I kept, doing my advocacy just in a kind of vanilla way, just how everybody else was doing it, it was just going to be very frustrating for me. And I was never going to feel like I was seen or I was really working in my strengths. And so we were doing this project when Jordan was about 13. He's 18 now. And he had this passion-driven project that he wanted to do. He wanted to take a book that he'd written when he was in fourth grade to get out of doing homework. And that was a whole nother kind of empowerment thing. Like, he couldn't figure out the homework that they were doing. He was miserable. And we asked the teacher if we could do that. And she said, yes. And so he wound up creating this book in 3 months' time. And then we forgot about it. And then he came into the kitchen one day and said, where's my book? And we wound up, having to publish it and putting it online. And then he started selling it. And so he wanted to take this book when he got into 8th grade to get out of doing homework there and make it into a monologue show for an organization called Sing. Okay. And so we had to bring everybody together. And again, I'm a filmmaker. So when we started to do this theater piece, I thought, we're doing all of this work. There's probably other parents that would benefit from it. I mean, we created this very sensory, safe space. We tried to take all the anxiety out of auditioning for the parts. We gave the parts to the kids ahead of time. We had a map to show them where all of the rooms were in the bathroom. And so we went through all of these different steps. And I thought, we should just film this. And so that gave, my daughters an opportunity to be producers because they do want to go into that. So everything like in your life can be a learning experience and a learning opportunity. And that's kind of part of what we do with the O'Kelley Lab. And we bring in mentors. So I'm not in the physics world. My son, Jordan, was into physics and math. I am not that person. So I, as a parent, had to go out and find those mentors. and find those programs so that he could be with his people.
But some of being with his people, Jordan, actually, you have filmed him trying to explain autism and his experience as a gifted individual to others. What was that experience like? Did he initiate that, or was that your next step to go beyond the lab and to really start broadcasting his ideas and his experiences?
Well, our kids have always been aware of their disabilities or their differences. And we have never, I don't know if it's just because I'm an older parent and we were just so happy to have kids, that we didn't have any expectations for them. We were just, anything they could do, we were just like, that's amazing. That's great. You're doing awesome. And so that, I think, is a gift. And I would say to parents that are, worried about whether their kids are going to hit those developmental milestones at a certain time or have a time frame for when they're going to do this or when they're going to do that. Those expectations I have found, and this is just me, to be depressing, because if your kid doesn't hit those and you have all those expectations, it's really it just blows you right out of the water. So I think if you can just be in the moment with your kid, and I had a neurologist, a long time ago ask me if I loved my kids. And that was one of those moments where, because I was in there talking about all the things that were wrong, he can't tie his shoe, he can't cross the street, and I was going on and on and on. And this wonderful doctor, he let me go on and on and on. And then when I was done, he said, "Can I ask you a question?" And I was like, "Sure. I'm here, I want to find out what's wrong with my kid." And he said, Do you love your son? And I was like, "Are you kidding me? Of course I love my son. I drove all the way to Sacramento to see this guy." And I was from LA. And I was like, "I just drove 5 hours." And he goes, "You really need to let this kid know that you love him. Because when you're sitting in here and you're just talking about all these things that are wrong with them, that's what they're hearing." And so that was like such a gift. He was probably 5. And I realized, why am I looking at him in the way that, in all the things that he can't do, this deficit lens, instead of the things that he can do, and be grateful for the things that he can do. So in, this advocacy journey that we've had with the film, we took the book, we made it into a monologue show, we did a podcast with the monologue show, and all the kids got to hear themselves doing the monologues, which was totally fun. And Jordan interviewed them and did the podcast. So that was a learning experience. And then we filmed the whole documentary, we edited it together, and then we had to put music, we had to do all the different parts of making the film, which was a learning experience for the kids. And then they went out into film festivals and did the Q&As with it, and they got to do all the advocacy for it and meet all of these families that were twice exceptional families and see what it's like for other families, not just what we're going through. And just group hugs in different cities. And it was just amazing for them to own who they are by this experience of getting out there and not being alone, and really owning what is twice exceptional.
And we're going to clarify that right now, because we've been using the concept of twice exceptional throughout the conversation. And you and I know this. Many of our listeners are probably not familiar with the term. Would you be willing to explain twice exceptional to our audience? And then we can talk some about the challenges that we've faced, because my son, like yours, is twice exceptional too.
So how it's been explained to me is twice exceptional is when an individual has disabilities and differences and also is gifted. And you can be gifted intelligently, you can be motor gifted, you can be empathetic. There's a lot of different gifts under the gifted side of the twice exceptional umbrella. So it's twice exceptional, or 2E. And basically and also, the gifted side has a gifted profile, which is, hardly ever talked about. And that's not, that has a lot of, sensory, a lot of the same things from, let's say, the autistic world. They're very similar. Maybe, they're heightened in sensitivities. they have sensory integration issues. They might have, there's just all, I mean, it could be anything and everything. And then the differences side or the disability side can be ADHD, it can be autism, it can be dysgraphia, it can be more than just one difference or disability. And with like Jordan is gifted, and he's also got autism and dysgraphia. So, but then underneath his autism, he has face blindness and he doesn't know where he is. I don't remember what that's called, but it's like he can't recognize where he's at. So between that and his slower processing speed, he will probably never drive a car, let's say. He can now tie a shoe, but he didn't tie a shoe until he was like 14. But here's a kid that wound up skipping high school completely, going from a full-time, a full IEP with a full-time aide in elementary school with all the different services, not being able to transition into middle school because it was just too big, too much going on, too much anxiety. We put him in a smaller, twice exceptional school where it was a different model, strength-based model. And then within that model, within about a year, he completely started accelerating because they were focused on what he could do, not what he couldn't do, and then wound up radically accelerating and going to high school at 14.
Right. And what I was thinking about as you were telling your story, our stories are not so dissimilar. You were going through the checklists. You're worried about everything they can't do. No one ever tells you to create some lines in the white space and start documenting all the things not on the list that other children are not doing, but your child can do. And then much like you, they were so focused on the autism component when we were entering school, they weren't really focused on the gifted side. They acknowledge, the child's bright, but this is how we teach. This is the program. And they were still trying to force them into the model. And so much like your son, our son, we did alternate methods, and now we have early college entry. And I think one of the things that I want parents to really hear in this is that the world is set up for the norms. So when you're going to the pediatrician's office, when you're meeting with a school psychologist, when you're meeting with teachers, because that's how our structures are set up, they're going to be looking at your child on the checklist. I think what is most frustrating, though, is that when your child's not hitting all the marks on the checklist and you have additional, but my child can do this, it's dismissed. And I think it's that dismissiveness that you and I saw that is what propelled us to act. Because it's like, I see this brilliance. Why is nobody doing anything?
I think that's so true. I totally couldn't agree more. I think that looking back, hindsight is so amazing. And from my journey, what I'm feeling is there just isn't the education. Teachers, doctors, they're just not educated in that gifted lens. They don't, if they were educated in that, when they were looking at your child, they wouldn't be just checking off the boxes and trying to put them into a category. They would be looking at the whole child more and really looking at the developmental, what they're, really accelerating in and what they're really low in and what that really means. From the first testing that we had, that was an outside test when Jordan was 4, his verbal was off the chart. And I hear this all the time, with certain, twice exceptional. His verbal was off the chart. They couldn't even test him. His verbal was so high. And then they told me that his handwriting was like 2 points away from the R word. They actually called it that. And I did not know what to do with that information. And he had such a huge, what's called scatter between these different categories. So whenever you see a kid that has that much of a scatter between their abilities, that's very indicative of something. And so right there, you can see that they're not going to be educated in a normal setting because they have such differences, such asynchronicity. So I really think most of it is just education. And if you have, and The other thing is they'll bring in people and they'll tell you that they're experts and they're making the decisions in like your IEPs. But those experts that you find out as parents later on weren't experts in the right categories that you needed to look at your kid. So it's a very, there's a couple of little things that are off. One is the experts that they're calling experts really aren't the experts in gifted education. And so if they're looking at a child that's got, certain profiles that are markers that are also in auditory processing or ADHD or autism or, some other, difference, but they don't realize that could also fall under gifted, then they're not going to check that box that the kid is gifted. We were told in 4 different schools that he could not be tested for gifted because he was autistic. So right there, 4 different, and as a parent, I'm like, oh, maybe it's the teacher, maybe it's the school. I kept jumping schools like a lot of families do, like, oh, the school just isn't supporting my kid. But if there's an overall, problem with the education of how we're educating teachers and they're not being given this type of information when they're getting their credentials in school, they get maybe 1 or 2 classes of special needs, but they're not getting any. There's no requirement that they have to take gifted education. So it's what right? So if you've never seen that, how are you going to say, oh, that's maybe he is autistic, but he's also gifted, or he's also this or that. So I really think a big part of it is just the education. And if parents aren't going to summits or aren't reading books, like the greatest book for Twice Exceptional that I like to recommend is Dr. Nicole Tetrell's Insights into a Bright Mind. Insights into a Bright Mind by Dr. Nicole Tetrell. She interviewed us for the book, and it covers a lot of different areas. So it's a great book to get if you're thinking, my kid might be twice exceptional, or a family.
And we know lots of families. One of the things I wanted to add was that when you were saying in education, I think there's a lot of societal misconception on what gifted is, and some of it's because of how schools are structured. So I think there's a lot of bright children out there, and they end up getting in gifted programs in schools. But I'm guessing with Jordan, and I know with Braden, they're beyond the gifted threshold that's set by the state. They would be at the level of what I would label genius. And so I think that that's where we kind of get into some issues when we work with public school entities. They are only required to provide gifted programming that's an IQ between 127 and 130, 135. When you have these children with IQs pushing 145, 150, that's different than the bright child. So I actually, because the word gifted is an umbrella term, just like autism is a spectrum. Now you have to break it down and go, well, there's bright children, and then there's these geniuses. And genius, like you were saying, when you really start looking at it, when you explore people like Einstein and Tesla, they had significantly asynchronous development as children. They had issues as adults. And that's where I think folks in the autism community will sometimes say, well, maybe they were autistic. But it really was because they were geniuses. And when parts of your brain develop so significantly, other parts are not going to develop, and you get that out of balance person. And that's what I think is happening in the workplace and at schools and everywhere. We're so used to trying to have like this even person, right? This person that can do just a little bit of everything, which is ironic because for society to work, you actually do need differentiation so that the world thrives.
And not just that, but you want to have that collaboration with those people. So that's where it gets really fun. And that's where I think whenever you're going into fields where you do have, and like think tanks or research, or you always want to acknowledge and have that. They don't want everybody that's all the same. They want people to get along, but they want people that have very different points of view so that they can bring them together so that we can elevate these ideas and reach other levels of whatever we're working in, whether it's physics or whether it's business or whatever. So that team collaboration is so valuable. And I think you really, and I think you really want to look at people's differences as something you want, and then acknowledge them and value them. And so I think that's where we need to start working with education, is really valuing the differences, not having them be a nuisance or making people feel bad for having that. You're stopping my lecture because you're asking so many questions. I mean, then create another class for that kid so that he can ask questions, because you don't want to stop that. We want to go, awesome. I love the way you're thinking. This is so great. Keep going. So I think that's, where we went to with, the O'Kelley lab is we just were not feeling like our kids were being acknowledged and valued. Any kids. I mean, it wasn't just my kids. I had all these other kids that would, I would send out letters and say, I think your idea is amazing, and the O'Kelley lab would love to work with you on that spinning thing that you're doing during recess. We had all these different fun things that we would do. We would create programs with teachers. We would get, we had one program where they had a bunch of kids that were misbehaving, and we got an ice cream store to come and sell ice cream at the school on Fridays. And those kids were the kids that had to sell it and learn about business. So wherever you see that possibility or that spark, you want to, just say, what can we do to acknowledge what this kid innately has? And so that's what we started to, and it's a lot of like floor time where you follow the kid's lead. We do a lot of that with the O'Kelley lab. And so if they show an interest in something, we basically follow it until we can't follow it anymore, until they're not into it anymore, until they've gotten to what they need to get out of it. And then they go on to something else. So we've done stand-up. We've, to find points at your point of view and humor in just it just was great for everything, for socialization, for everything. Then that led to mime. Mime was really helpful because Jordan couldn't read facial cues. So we noticed that he was looking at the whole body. And we were like, whoa, there's something here with nonverbal communication. Holy cow. And so we went on a whole, research kind of pilot with a mime. And we created something called Mime as Therapy, which we now have as a series on our website that you can buy for very little money. If you have a kid that really needs to look at some of those nonverbal cues, it's a perfect thing to do. We put that into our movie as well. We use that to get the kids loosened up before they audition for the parts. So, we just kind of weave it all in. And I would say that's probably what we do. We're in the moment as much as we can. We're trying not to live in expectations of what they should do. It's what can they do? What do they want to do? And then how can we take that and make it sustainable for them? So during COVID, it was a perfect example of finding the purpose in our kids' lives, because it was a time when everything was upside down. There was no certainty. And it was like we had to anchor ourselves and figure out what to do so that these kids were not anxious. And we looked for the purpose. What would make them, they were all feeling like, what can we do? What can we do? And they were, 12, 13, 14, they were not that old. And so we had to find ways that they could feel like they were making a difference and in control of what was happening in their life, at least. So my one daughter started cutting our hair. She just taught herself how to cut hair and started cutting hair. Another kid started a tutoring business and started sewing. She learned how to sew and started making masks and giving them away in the community. And then Jordan wound up doing the tutoring with the math, and the other kid wound up doing the English tutoring, and then the kid that started the company wound up doing executive function and socialization. So, boom, wherever they're at, you just kind of jump in and go with it until they feel successful.
And as you're saying all this, I can imagine there's parents and teachers going, oh, this is brilliant, because it is. And you used your background as an actress and a filmmaker and all these things to create a platform and activities in such a way that accentuate the strengths. And as you were telling your story, I can see parents going, I wish our schools knew how to do this. I wish teachers know how to do this. And then I was thinking, there are teachers and people that know how to do this. It's if you're in the right arena, and it's sports and the arts. Because if you look at your band teacher, your art teacher, your sports coaches, they do this already. I mean, they may not always be disability inclusive. There's always an opportunity there, but they are strengths based in the terms of they try to align children to the instrument that they have a natural interest and disposition, right? They create music and stuff based on the skills of the band that they have at the time. A coach tries to put the children or the players in the right position so that the team as a collective whole are successful. And while your children don't have to play music and sports, we do know that there's definitely an opportunity there, that strengths-based model is not novel. It's just absence in education and at work. All right. So it's evident that you and I are big fans of the strengths-based model. And I think we were thrust into this space because of our children. I don't know if you were always strengths-based, but I can definitely tell you that I'm that way, not just with Twice Exceptional students and individuals, but I'm that way with everybody now. It's what is your talent and how do you accentuate the best? So I know that you and I both have this goal of creating more inclusive spaces. What are some key strategies or initiatives that you've been involved in recently to help create more of these spaces, both in education and the community at large?
I totally agree with you. And I think I was always one of those people. I was always one of those people that would look at the underdog and try to help them, not save them, but I always would look at them and go, but they have value. And so I think when I had these kids that were diagnosed with these, I was not someone that, I was probably more gifted. I was 2E maybe, but more gifted, where I had maybe just dyslexia and I didn't know it when I was growing up, but I wasn't, neurodiverse. So I was very athletic. I was able to do things that my kids aren't able to do, but I've always been someone that's cheering the person on that was more the underdog. So I think that was always me, and finding what you could do. So I just kind of always looked at everybody like that. What you could do, or what you'd be good at, is one of my things in life, I think. So this just felt like a natural progression to fall into the strength-based model, or, looking at what people can do. In the education model, it's really, I just had to get away from the deficit model. I had to go into a different model. And when we were in the deficit model, even though I knew my kids were capable of more, I had no idea what they were capable of, because I was in that mindset of not even thinking about what was possible. And so I think, in all aspects of your life, it would be great. It's great if you can be surprised. And it's great if you go into situations not thinking, oh, I know how this is going to work out, or I know exactly what they're going to get to, and they're not going to be able to go beyond that. Because what we do is we limit ourselves. So I think just in education and in life and in jobs, the first thing that we need to do is change our mindset. We need to really look at us not even having an idea of what's possible. Because as soon as you think then you limit yourself, and you limit your kid, and you limit everyone around you. So we have to just live in the impossible. The impossible is possible. And I think that's number one. And if you live and you come from that place, then you're not going to limit yourself. And no matter what you get yourself into, you're always going to be pleasantly surprised and you're always going to be happy because you're not going to have those expectations of, I think he's going to get a B, or I think he's going to get a C in this class. And that grading system alone, I think, stops so many kids. It's ridiculous, because then they could go so far. They could go so far beyond what the class is asking them with an A, and they're stopping at the A. So, it just doesn't, so many of these just ideas and concepts, I think, are the problem. And as soon as we can blow that all out of the water and start looking at things with a fresh mind, I think it's going to be a lot better. I'm working right now with an organization called Happy. I'm volunteering for them, and they have a set of careers that they're focusing on the strength-based of different neurodiverse individuals and creating these careers and going into the job force and trying to make a big difference with that. But within this organization, it's all volunteer, and they pretty much want you, like your strengths, the same, to volunteer, the same way they're looking at these individuals that they're trying to get jobs for. So they're going to take someone like me and let me just run with it. What am I bringing to the party? And so that's a very different way to have an organization kind of run. And I think that's really where we need to get to. We need to really be having this. I'm reading a book right now by Keith, and I'm trying to remember his last name, but it's all about kind of you having the authority in the job. And I'm not saying that's like, total chaos in some situations, but it's really taking on the leadership yourself and not just waiting for someone to tell you what to do. And so I think it takes, it just makes you look at everything a little differently. So I just kind of think everything needs to change. We have to look at what we can do, go with our strengths, go with our passions, go with our interests, and move from there into what we are creating. Like, take back the critical thinking and really kind of asking yourself, what do you want? What can you do? What do you not want? What can't you do? And then who's hiring that? So then you're kind of taking it on yourself. You're not going to an agency and saying, what jobs do you have for me? You kind of need to be thinking as an individual, because we are all individuals. This is a spectrum. The world is a spectrum, and it's going to be more about, and since COVID especially, because now all of everyone in education and in the workplace is looking at, wow, we could do this job at home. So it's this wonderful time, I think, that we've never had before, because people are much more open to, a new idea or what if than they were before. There was a lot of, you can't do that, or they're not going to hire you, or you have to have this. And then since COVID, there's so many people that just went, forget it. I can live at home and I can work, or I could do this job. And so I really think we're in a wonderful time where people, if they have the ideas, they should just go for it.
They should. And they should never take no for an answer. That's how you and I got here.
Exactly.
As you were talking about the strengths-based approach, it led me back to thinking about the importance of collaboration. And it's an interesting concept because Henry Ford kind of created the employment model that we have today, where you have humans as widgets that are cogs on the wheel. And that's what our schools are set up for, to create the workers of the future. And I think one of the things I am trying to get out, and you are too, is that the demographics of the workers of the future are shifting. And something that corporations talk about but don't always realize so great, and schools too, is this concept of collaboration. Schools are set up to really weed people out and create a deficit view so that you have top talent or top students and deficit-based students. A strengths-based model would be like, who's the best at math? Who's the best at art? And there would be room for everybody to thrive because we wanted them to come together. I think people, when they hear folks like us talk, philosophically get it, but sometimes, okay, not sometimes, I feel like there's a difference between appreciating something and its value and it transpiring in reality. So as we look at the future, what are you thinking about in terms of the O'Kelley Lab and your advocacy efforts? What do you think that you'll be doing to help push this into the landscape so that it becomes a reality?
Well, first of all, everything you said, I totally agree with, and I can see that. But there's always been that self-made guy, like there's always been that person that, there's the people that go to Harvard, and then there's that guy that dropped out of high school that just went off and made $1 billion trillion, and he's a different thinker, right? So I kind of feel like now, with all of the tools that we have from the internet or technology, you can pretty much learn and do a lot of things outside of that brick and mortar. And so if you're the type of person that has a twice exceptional mind, or let's say a profoundly gifted twice exceptional kid, why do you really need school? If you're at that level, you're probably going to be able to figure out a lot of things at your pace, and you're gonna look for what's purposeful in the way you're building your intelligence, right? You're kind of like a computer that's on its own, doing its own thing and getting better and better and better, and you don't really need to be in a school, basically, because you're figuring it all out outside of school. So you're not unlike that self-made millionaire, the guy that didn't go to school. So there's always going to be those kinds of people that don't do well, don't have the right, pacing, or see the value of going to school. So I kind of feel like this individual education model, the individual work model, you have to kind of go to what how the person is built, what makes the person tick, what their specialty is, and then kind of work with that. So with the O'Kelley Lab, like what we're doing is we're still getting out there, we're still doing advocacy, we're still reaching so many people that don't even know what twice exceptional is. We're using primarily our film because it's easy. It's on 3 platforms right now. It's on Tubi and Amazon Prime and Infobase, but it just got picked up for 4 more platforms. So we're already embracing a distribution model that is different. It's not like the old school distribution model where you put your film in a theater for 3 months and then they release it to this, this pay per view, and then they release it to. We're doing something totally different. We're with this other company called Film Hub that releases it all at the same time. So there's always going to be people that have different ways of thinking that are like, hey, I think this is the way to go, because we're in times are changing. People are getting their content from different places, and there's 8 billion people, right?
Well, how do you envision the landscape of opportunities for exceptional individuals will evolve?
So the way I envision it is you really are person first. You're really looking at what their strengths are, and then following their, interests, their strengths, and then finding the right careers that they're interested in and that they can be successful in. And I think that's the way to look at it, not try to, fit people in where they're, like, oh, I think, we need more accountants in the world. I think you really need to go with what their strengths are and what their interests are. And that pretty much happens anyway. But in the neurodiverse community, you might want to, I was just in a conference yesterday on a panel, and a few of the moms had kids that were doing really well in data entry. Hello. It was like this great success for them. And these moms seemed so surprised because they didn't see that coming, because maybe they didn't realize that there were careers in that. So I think it's really going to be about educating parents and, counselors and university counselors so that we can try to support our population in finding careers that they're interested in and then giving them that way in. whether it's a mentor, whether it's an internship, whether it's actually going to the job and seeing what it's like and spending a week or two and being in that, having employers support these people in checking it out and really seeing like, wow, I think I could do this job. And then along with giving them the supports that they would need that they don't have. Maybe they need extra supports in living skills or in navigating the social skills of the workplace. But I think we need to have job coaches or mentors and support programs within these, within these employment opportunities, whether they're long-term or just a course or a summer or an internship. I definitely think you need to have that so that you can transition. And that's the other thing. It's like transitions are just not really talked about enough. I think a lot of our kids have issues with the transition part because they really have anxieties and they don't know what to expect. And so I'd like to see more work with the transitions in all of these different stages of life.
I agree. And I love the frame up of really following the first and first strengths-based, opening things up for possibilities. As we come to the end of our time together, because it flies by, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners? Like if there's one thing they take away from this conversation, what do you not want them to forget?
I would say what I like to tell people is to follow your child's or your husband's or your family's or whoever it is that you're working with in your life or your work person, follow their strengths and embrace their differences. Because if you follow their strengths and embrace their differences, they're going to be more successful, they're going to feel more supported, and you're going to feel more purposeful in that relationship because you're not telling them what to do. You're really listening and watching what they're about and really trying to be there to be a part of their life. And I would say live in the moment as much as you can live in the moment and embrace that and try to just not be all about those expectations because time is really a concept. It's just a concept. It takes as long as it takes, and it can take as short as it takes. So if we just don't get caught up in that and we just embrace people and look at them and love them the way they are and value them. People need to value other people for what they are good at, for what they are offering, and be in gratitude.
And I couldn't say that any better. I want to thank you so much, Harri, for sharing your passion and your insights with us. What you've done with the O'Kelley Lab and your children and so many other families is just inspiring. And to all of our listeners out there, remember that you can ignite opportunity too. As Harri said today, help people pursue their passions. Don't get stuck in probability and focus on possibility because together we're going to create a brighter future for everyone. Thank you all for listening. Until next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Think Differently. I hope you found our discussion today insightful and thought-provoking. I want to thank Audio Work Studios for their exceptional production and recording support. Without their expertise and dedication, this podcast would not be possible. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to share it with others. Your support helps us to reach new audiences and promote neurodiversity in our world. Also, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite platform so that you can stay up to date on the latest episodes. We look forward to seeing you again soon on Think Differently.